Everyday Life of an Aspie. If you're following me right now, I'm Aspie, and if you're new to my channel, I welcome you all with open arms, and hopefully with this channel that you can journey with me with my condition of speech syndrome, OCD and the like, and gain a better understanding of me as a person in general. First and foremost, I need to be aware that, as I said before, of what's been going on right now, the changes of my schedule versus everything else that's been going on, which is obviously no-brainer, even though I can't stop it beyond my control. All I can do is just hopefully just tackle on head on like I usually do. So no further ado, guys, basically, if you've been following my channel at the moment, I'm trying to hopefully do some research and do some Let's Talk serious topics, as well as hopefully basically covering some other bits that has been missed while I've been away. So I humbly apologise, but as you know, that hopefully once I'm informed that I'll get the ball running and actually get going with it. So this one's basically going to be called Let's Talk Domestic Violence, and the questions are we need to question ourselves really is, why is domestic violence really high in New Zealand here, and what are the real factors that may be influencing these domestic violence purposes sort of thing, and what can be done about it. So some form of solution or management tools or something around that to actually help us get through it all. From people who I've talked to in the past, though, however, told me that New Zealand was once a great place to live in New Zealand, but in the last few years, as we've realised that when we've been watching TV on the news, or even maybe behind closed doors, people abuse their kids regardless what it may be. It used to be a good place to be in New Zealand to raise children, but in the last few years, basically, it's just been a problem of domestic violence and children dying. That's getting worse sometimes as the years progress on. Young children may die from head injuries, that have quadrupled in the last few years, or shall we say in the last 20 years, not 10. Child abuse is an invisible, crime, as it's done in silence or secret behind closed doors, as I said. The cause is just no mystery. We need to go through all the statistics, politics, and more to know what's really going on and the actual cause to what's going on. Okay, as we know, basically, that there are some organisations out there that can help with, domestic violence and all these other important factors that I'm going to be addressing in my next few video series over. So I'm hoping that we can take into account that. I'll link them down below, hopefully, if need be, if the need arises. But as we know, basically, also when it comes down to it, however, that in New Zealand alone, basically, especially with some people, they give the grunt of and groans about, SIPs, especially child youth and family services, basically, are usually behind closed doors trying to, save lives as well. They usually are the heart of all the problems that are occurring. What we got to realise, though, however, with SIPs or child youth and family services, basically, what I've heard about when I've been watching the Nigel Latta series of the hard stuff with Nigel Latta, he mentioned about how SIFs receives about 3,000 calls a day, and out of those calls that they receive, 300 of them are, concerns of the child's safety, regardless what it may be it domestic violence, child abuse, neglect, and like. As you can hear, some of these statistics are really appalling, however, and the worst part of these cases, of these accidents, is obviously in the hands of the emergency department. Every year, police will arrest up to around 1,500 adults alone for assaulting children. On average, one child dies every 3.5 weeks. The rise of children abuse of, shall we say, child abuse or substance abuse, I should say, and assaults are highly rising yet again. So as you look at these, as I'm reading these statistics or sharing these statistics, it's really appalling. New Zealand has a second rate of children's homicide, however, that is double in Australia alone, as well as tripling in the UK alone, however, also. These statistics are really horrific. I believe wholeheartedly we're looking at this problem the wrong way, however. We look at the high court cases, reports of child homicide. It's just one part of the bigger problem that needs to be, solved and addressed. But as I said before, many of these topics I'm sharing, people tend to just ignore it and sweep it under the carpet, thinking it's It's not 100% true that it's happening, but in reality, we need to open up our eyes and actually be real here. Obviously, it is happening, and that no matter what's going down, regardless of these important issues that I'm talking about, be it domestic violence, be it child abuse, be it just, poverty versus basically special educational needs versus just general educational needs versus, everything else that's changing around us right now of these policies and government schemes of things, as well as what else that's probably coming into play of what's causing these problems. But as we know, the problem with this violence inside the family homes, New Zealand has appalling rates of family violence, however. This is a real issue, and as of many realities, we need to open our eyes to it. New Zealand Police, however, receives 90,000 calls, reports of family violence every year. To break it down to you, that's at least one incident of this in every few minutes, or shall we say every 6 minutes. 20% of the incidents of family violence, however, is reported to the police. Around 450,000 incidences, however, a year, and 60% of those incidents involves young innocent children that basically just gets in the way of, all this domestic violence through their parents. Okay, there are many causes to this, so therefore, as I've shared before, one of them is child abuse, 2 is maybe drug abuse, 3 is the crime rates, 4 is your income, 5 is the economy, 6 poverty, 7 alcohol, which I'm going to just really break it down to real brief in this part of the series, and if you want I'll do it more in depth on these anyway. Okay, for the causes, however, as we know, child abuse plays one of the problems of domestic violence, as I've said so many times before. This can be a huge issue in New Zealand, however. Okay, as we know, basically, also though, there has been certain, little suburbs or towns such as Flaxmere Hastings has been in the limelight, that has been, has demonstrably high rate of drug abuse and crime rate in New Zealand. So did once upon a time Palmerston North, however, did too. But however, I'm going to just bring a little bit of the history of Flaxmere from what I can recall. Okay, and in the 60s, especially, Flaxmere was a place for showing home for raising kids, which I mean here is it was a place of safe haven that you can raise kids with no problems at all. Question to ask ourselves again though is what went wrong when this went down. Okay, obviously in the history of it all too, basically in Flaxmere there used to be the freezing works, which was the heart of the community. Obviously in that time when they had that going, the families were obviously minding their own business and just working in the freezing works basically as their source of income, obviously, for most families, just to get them by. But it's in 1994, however, the change of the economy obviously just decreased, and obviously it made the people that worked there obviously lose their jobs. A lot of them did. Obviously, families in that time frame in 1994 onwards, however, were struggling to make ends meet when it happened of the freezing works closing down. Day after day, some of the strains started to show and they started to fracture, and obviously this has happened many times before, obviously, with many other places that has been closing down. Here's an example, the carpet factory in Foxton, I think from memory, or one of the two. There was a big stink about the freezing works in Shannon that's now closed down and the like. So many people, as I said, are struggling to make ends meet regardless in small towns, and they're doing their best what they can regardless of the time frame of what's going on with the economy versus everything else in between this. Flaxmere, however, ended up developing a gang and alcohol kind of community, especially here in Palmerston North, New Zealand, along with the growing problem of family violence. Poverty, however, is 10 times more common in the poorest of the 10% of the population. Not just financial poverty, however, I mean also the spiritual poverty and just poverty in general, basically, when, kids are not fed and, things ain't met. Russell Wills, Commissioner in Child Protection Hooks basically has noticed that there has been a lot of changes into that poverty state of things, as well as just hearing about all these violent cases of, domestic violence coming in with children and stuff. And he knows what he's talking about. However, scientists, also have seen at hand the poverty is the break at hand to domestic violence. Okay, another cause is the alcohol. Children who are born with alcohol fetal syndrome can be basically the heart of the problem, obviously. As we know, basically now, alcohol is a real big problem right now, obviously, and obviously young women are drinking more heavily than ever before, getting into trouble with law. But I'll be talking more about New Zealand as a sex country based on this report saying this, but this. Obviously, we know that really damaged kids are from the alcohol syndrome or what have you. Alcohol doesn't just affect the brain, it affects families and communities. We've got to remember though, however, with alcohol, we can imagine it as basically the petrol putting into the engine of our cars to keep everything running smoothly. As we know, alcohol is cheap and readily accessible. In most small towns now, there's a lot more pubs than ever before and liquor stores, which is a far cry. Just bear in mind though, however, as I'm bringing up the statistics as well as basically just, my thoughts and opinions on this, I'm not pointing the finger on one community to next, be it Flaxmere, Palmerston or what have you. No, this is far from it. This is needing to be an eye-opener and hopefully just alarm bells for us all, basically, to know what's going on. This is far from it, as poverty isn't just there, but other places in New Zealand, and that the pattern of poverty and alcohol abuse and family violence is repeated all around the country of New Zealand. And the studies I've been researching, I've been hearing about from major latest series of basically the Child Family Services cases, obviously serves up as like 60,000 to about 20,000 of those as child neglect. Family violence organisations are actually trying to basically help people all around New Zealand to, basically help us out regardless what it is. So like I said, I'll link those ones below if you really need the help or know of somebody that's in that predicament, because it's time to act somehow and work together as a team. Obviously, another food for thought here is maybe just the face-to-face contact is maybe important with, many people that are struggling and whatnot, Another thing is we need to bear in mind though, however, the questions to, why there is abusive and domestic behaviours, basically also the triggers and causes. There could be basically reasoning behind this, but we shouldn't be excusing those behaviours, be it those past traumatic events that maybe the parents has been through and they haven't dealt with it and they put it onto the children basically, and it affects the children obviously in a long way of seeing the things. Obviously we know sometimes when it comes down to it, when the adult that was a child once upon a time that hasn't dealt with it obviously will shift the blame onto their kids. But we need to look within ourselves and actually take full responsibility and accountability of our own actions, however. We need to learn right from wrong. We need to get right to the source, knowing the trigger and causes, obviously. Self-exposure and self-healing begins within maybe some sort of therapy, maybe, regardless what it may be. We may need to have some form of understanding and some sort of resources that needs to be readily available regardless what it is, like I said before. But health assessment of these behaviours of the domestic violence, however, to continue on basically is just, got to love through actions, inclusion of the community, values and morals, what we've been taught, building bridges, exposure, therapy, trust in each other. Self-learning, certain things that needs to be self-learnt, building families from the ground up. Is this a culture thing or not? Not necessarily. If you can fix the home, you can fix the community. Obviously, family is important. Contact with families by reaching out, doing community work, or just, like I said, face-to-face contact somehow. As we know, violence isn't always the answer, however, and sometimes with violence it stems from a child from what they may witness from their parents, and they think it's okay just to go around being the bully or whatever and go through from their parents. Gotta remember love isn't through violence either, however. Sometimes some men need to learn how to become men properly instead of, being the little boys, being the way they are. But obviously in the past, obviously it was some men, they've been taught not to talk about their problems, which that's probably what's stemming up certain problems right now, be it domestic violence and all the like, which I'm going to share more of. But to end this, basically, not all parents are evil parents. I guess, poor parenting could be the blame for this, even though despite the lack of resources, understanding and everything else that's going on. For me, there are a lot of issues that need to be tackled, be it poverty, maybe versus just the, everyday things like your alcohol, the violence and everything else that I've just clearly addressed here. Well, basically the last bit is the government may need to face some long-term solutions to fix it, as well as for us to work it all together. Because obviously, for some reason, like someone said, basically in the nagalaisa, that sometimes people with experience and that will know what's going on and stuff, and obviously can be able to help. You don't always need the nitty-gritty, obviously, qualifications. Sometimes if we just get together in a community group and actually know the warning signs and whatnot, then we know what's going down. But obviously that's just a quick short brief of let's talk basically domestic violence. Can be like the thumbs up for support, comment below if I've missed anything, or just comment below for anything that you feel to challenge me on, or just make a discussion about this. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, AspieAnswersAll. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. Feel free to just share these videos around to family and friends to make this awareness as much as possible. Thanks for your support, thanks for watching. We'll see you all again soon.